You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. Between 2 and 6% of people have hoarding disorder, yet very few of us talk about it. Learn about the condition from me, somebody who has it, as well as academics, therapists and other experts I interview. Find out how to support the podcast at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Finally, I am not a doctor, I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? Happy New Year! I know I said that last week, but I recorded last week's episode at the end of last year. So this is my first Happy New Year of actual 2025. I hope you're having a decent one.
Let's start with some housekeeping.
Little bit of housekeeping before I get into today's interview. For anyone, whether you've been to one before or not, who is interested in a de-hoarding accountability Zoom session, for January only, I have a 20% discount code for any tickets you buy in January. If you would like to come along, if you would like to get a discount on your tickets, make sure you are subscribed to the email newsletter, which is where the discount code is. It goes out every Monday. Subscribe at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/newsletter. Last year, I went to see a film because it sounded interesting. About a third of the way into it, I started to see parallels to hoarding. And by 2/3 of the way in, I knew I was going to talk about it on the podcast, which I did in episode 146. The film is called Where Dragons Live, and it's about 4 siblings and their children who are clearing out their parents' house after they died. Harriet Impey is one of those siblings, the only daughter of Oliver and Jane, and she heard the episode I made about the film. We started chatting, and she's here to talk about the experience of clearing out a full house while dealing with a parent's death, about her parents' relation to stuff and how that impacted her. Harriet is an artist based in the Netherlands whose work is inspired by nature. Harriet, thank you for talking to me. How are you?
Hi, it's lovely to talk to you. I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to finally see you, meet face to face.
Indeed. We've been emailing a lot, haven't we? It's nice.
Yeah, very nice.
So you and your siblings had to clear out your parents' house after your mum died. How do you end up with that being a film, first of all?
It's a bit of a complicated story, but basically Susanna and I had met each other many years ago and started talking about dragons.
Susanna is the director of the film.
Yes, Susanna Rass. And she had always said she'd always wanted to make a film about dragons. I said, my father and I had always intended to write a book about dragons. So we started talking about my father, who was a really interesting man, who started off as a zoologist and then he became an art historian. So we grew up in a house that was full of both sort of natural objects and kind of art historical objects. And it started off as a film about dragons and then became more and more about my family. Particularly with COVID, we could film in the house but not travel around the world. And Susanna met my brothers and rather sort of fell in love with the craziness of the house and the brothers and the family. And it sort of developed like that. When my mother died, I rang her up and said, we're going to have to sell the house. If you want to film here, we're going to have to do it now. So it developed organically. And it was really, really interesting being part of that process.
I bet. So your parents ended up with this very large home in the 60s after your grandmother sold a painting of St. George and the Dragon and split the proceeds between her children. The house is a theme throughout the film. I found it at times really charming and enchanting and at times really foreboding and ominous. What was your experience of that house?
It's interesting, actually, since the film, a couple of family members have said, but it's a lovely house. you don't see that in the film. I think you do. In the summer, it's absolutely magical. And for me, the garden was always the most important place, always the place I was happiest, sort of down on my knees looking at worms and things. But in the winter, it's very, very cold. And when we were young, it was much colder. And actually, as a tween with arthritis, I would come home from school on the bus and just go and sit by the Arga with my cat because there was nowhere else in the house that was warm. Later on, there was a bit more heating, but the same ancient boiler. But it was a mixture of that. It was very, very present. It dominated everything. Where, if something was leaking or something needed mending, that was a fairly major. It played a major role in our lives because there was always something that needed doing. And my brothers are all extremely good at sort of mending roofs and, I don't know, doing extraordinary. They're extraordinarily handy, I suppose. But it has always been this very, very strong presence, member of the family theme for all of us.
And when it came to clearing out the house after your mother died, there was an awful lot of stuff to go through.
Yes.
Yeah, and seeing it in the film, it seemed like a very mixed experience of, on the one hand, the nostalgia and memories associated with the things you were going through. On the other hand, this immense task of emptying this very large house of its many, many possessions. All of that combined with grief and complicated feelings and memories. So how would you describe the experience of sorting through everything your parents had left behind?
Hell? I mean, it was awful. We sort of didn't do much for a year. We had very, very complicated things with probate, with the inheritance. So we couldn't really do anything for a while, for nearly a year. And in a way, that was good. I read every book I could about hoarding and tidying. And we got everything photographed, everything that was accessible photographed. And my sister-in-law invented this system, which is designed for a business, I think. It's called Task World. And we put, for every room, it was this huge, huge thing on OneDrive where we had basically every item under each room. And then we all had a colored tag and we could all tag things that we wanted. And we also had a sort of basic valuation of everything. We could tag things that we wanted. If more than one people tagged it, that was fine. But then later on, we negotiated it. I think it was a really good idea, because there was so much potential for resentment in a big family. We love each other, but even if you love each other, it's easy for these things to become uncomfortable, painful, difficult. And we all have basically, we love each other, but it's not always easy relationships between each of us. And I think that did work really well. We divided things up pretty well. And then once we started, I mean, somehow I took the lead. That was never really discussed. One of my brothers is the executor, the horrible, horrible job of being the executor. And anyone out there, do not make your poor children your executors because it's just ghastly. And he did that with my cousin, who's a sort of financial chap, which was helpful. But yeah, I sort of became, I'm quite bossy and I like lists and spreadsheets and things like that. I also like stuff. I like sorting through stuff. I used to run clothes swaps and I was always collecting things for refugees. And I don't know, I like sorting through stuff. Not perhaps on this scale. It was insane. And it was one of those things that some people are more helpful at than others. And if you get easily overwhelmed by stuff, this is something that you just can't do. And I banned people from coming into the house and opening cupboards and going, oh my God, because it's deeply unhelpful. You just have to keep your head down and keep going. I lost a lot of weight. I didn't sleep. I couldn't really eat. I had constant palpitations. I pushed my body beyond what it was capable of doing, because as a disabled person working in a house with lots of stairs, this was not great. So it was a fairly awful thing to do, to put it mildly. And the house was way, way fuller than it looks in the film. Way fuller. There was just endless stuff. I would think I'd got to the end of a category. Clothes, for instance, what I started with. We had all my mother's clothes, all my father's clothes, all my grandmother's clothes, all of our clothes from childhood, all my mother's clothes from childhood, plus 2 great aunts' clothes. Just unimaginable. Anyway, it was a bit grim. And my brother Lawrence lives nearby. He didn't really do sorting, but he was, good moral support. Edward was living in the house for a lot of it. He's not a sorter. He's not a thrower awayer, but he was doing lots of other useful things. Matt came over a bit. Everyone did their bit in their own way. But I would say that I'm the only member of the family who's capable of doing that level of getting rid of stuff, really, and going through stuff. And it was a year pretty much full time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Presumably this is a massive interruption of your usual life.
Yeah, it completely took over. And I abandoned my family. I went over for 2 teenage children. And I did really leave them in the lurch. My husband obviously is very capable, but has a very full-time job. And the children helped as well. My son in particular came over and carried stuff around, and was absolutely great. Yeah, it entirely took over my life. Yeah. But it couldn't have happened any other way. And my brothers have been wonderful. They have really appreciated, what we all did, but what I did, and how big a deal that was. But because I'm an artist, because my time is my own, I could. One of my brothers was trying to run a national museum at the same time.
Yeah.
Having just nursed my mum with me, people have busy lives.
Yeah.
My brother Lawrence is an obstetrician. If he doesn't go to work, several people die. It's fairly big. Yeah.
Were you aware as a child that you were living among a lot of stuff, or was it just your norm?
It was interesting. I remember occasionally somebody coming to the house and going, wow, it's really messy. And being like, what? Really? Really being surprised. It was always a bit of a different house because it was sort of big and you could get lost in it, which most people didn't have houses you could get lost in. It's not really a thing. But yeah, you're not sort of aware of the scale of crud, I think, unless you start looking at it.
Yeah, you grow up with just, it's often when you leave home, isn't it, that you realise that certain things about your own childhood are a bit odd. But when you're living it, it's just how things are.
Yeah, I think I was always very conscious that we were all kind of different from other children, wearing 1940s rugby shorts at school instead of normal gym uniform, for instance. I'm not, going on, see, when you went on sleepovers and everyone had like sleeping bags, and we had these weird army ones that were like hollowed out dead camels, but they were very useful, very warm, very practical. And horribly uncomfortable. Horrible things. But it was just, that was all part of the sort of, this keeping stuff. And why would you not, use that stuff? Why would you have something new when you could have something old?
So when I talked about the film in the previous podcast episode, I said with unreasonable confidence that this was not a hoarded house because the size of the house meant that even though there was a lot of stuff, it didn't impair living. People could move around because there were endless nooks and crannies for the stuff. I have questioned that unreasonable confidence many times since I made that statement. I would love your perspective on that. Do you think the house was hoarded?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot, and listening to your podcast as well has really made me frame what it is one is asking. What is hoarding? You know, when is hoarding hoarding? And one of your episodes, it talked about, you talked about what people's attitude towards the objects in the house, that being relevant. So, is it a sort of Tracy Emin collection of depression nest objects, or is it about the objects? And I think the objects, so my mother, I think personally, I would say that my mother was a hoarder. I think if she had not had so much space and massive thing, domestic help for her entire married life, if she had not had that, I think she could easily have ended up with sort of goat paths. I really do see that. She had a very strange relationship to objects. They got in the way of her relationship to people. I remember her screaming at my son when he was very little and he was playing with the remote of a very sturdy remote of a chairlift that was never used anymore. And she went nuts. And I was like, but he's quiet. He's 1.5. He's quietly playing with something that won't hurt him. She was like, yes, but it might get damaged. And I'm like, I don't know what he's going to do with it. It wasn't something that a baby chewing on it was going to damage it. And that sort of thing. She had this, I remember my little daughter coming downstairs in her Hello Kitty pajamas. And my mum had a thing about Hello Kitty being wrong or something. And my mother was like, oh. And you were like, how can you look at a 1.5-year-old in a pink fluffy pajamas and go, oh. Another one of my nieces, she went, they showed her a picture of a coloured in picture of a Disney princess. And my mother was like, it makes me feel sick. And, I think it was all part of this same thing, that somehow there was more importance to objects and how I feel about them than my relationships. And I think that was really sad, because she really, really wanted to have intimate relationships, but stuff and how she felt about things like that got in the way. And when my brother and I laugh about the list, all these things that we were supposed to be and do and have, that was also about objects. You weren't allowed to want Hello Kitty or a Range Rover or something. How you felt about objects was indicative of your worth in a particular way. So it was definitely a complex relationship with objects. But I think that there was another thing you or one of your guests said on the podcast about, I never saw an empty anything. And that really made me laugh, because it's so true. And it's taken me, I still struggle with the idea that a cupboard can be anything other than absolutely bursting full. Because why would it not be? When we travel, my husband is able to have a suitcase that isn't full. And I am baffled by that ability. I do not know how you can do it. How can you not stuff the drawer to its absolute capacity? And that was definitely a thing. And it made me think that in a way the hoard was there, but it was hidden. It was in the attics. I had no idea how bad the attics were. The garages had attics too, and they were full. Everything was hidden away. And as a child, I remember under my bed, and there was a drawer in my room, and I used to worry about this drawer. It was full of stuff, and I just used to worry about it. And I know there was a sort of shame attached to having these hoards, and yet everyone had them. It wasn't out there. There's something uncomfortable about that fact that it was like a hidden hoard. It was a hidden shame.
Yeah. De-hoarding darlings are a special group of listeners who go the extra mile to support the podcast. They get an extra written post every month with links, answers to extra questions from guests, recommendations, and a de-hoarding playlist. You can become a de-hoarding darling and help to support the future of the podcast, as well as getting this monthly blog post at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. Related, I think, at one point in the film you talk about how you're talking with one of your brothers about how your parents felt it was very important that you were all very observant, and you said there was a lot of looking at things and not perhaps looking at what was going on with us. And you and your brother talk about being afraid of your mother and that emotions other than anger were just not allowed. How does that affect you now in terms of allowing yourself to feel and express emotions?
Well, I think it's a big deal. Yeah, I've done therapy for about 20 years now, and a big part of that has been about allowing myself to feel stuff. And I think it's a problem for all of the family about, suppressing grief, for instance, and allowing it to come out sideways. And, I don't think anybody, apart from me, really allowed themselves to grieve for my father, which was a huge sort of tragedy for all of us. I'm not sure enough grieving went on. And, later on with my mother, who was older, that wasn't a tragedy. But I think it's a big problem. And I think one of the things the film has done is allowed us just a little bit to scratch the surface of talking about what did go on, about being scared as a child, about violence, about being frightened of one's parent, which is not great for you. And I think a lot more help is needed. And I wish my brothers had the help that I have had, because I think it makes me much happier. It makes me much easier to live with. It makes me, for all the people around me, I think life is easier because I have had therapy, but also for myself. And I believe very strongly in therapy. You don't only have it in a sort of dramatic, and it's not navel gazing. It's just helping you, be a better person. It's kind of character building in a way.
Yeah.
And being afraid of your mum is something that doesn't go away. You don't solve that easily, but you can at least look at the behaviors that you're exhibiting and why you're doing that. And I think there was a lot of shame around, and that has never been talked about, as is usual with shame. But also just so much anger that came out sideways, and so much anxiety. And that, I think, I've noticed most as an adult later on, is realizing that a lot of the controlling behavior of my mother was because she was terrified. She was terribly anxious, and I think we're all quite anxious. I knew I was, but for me, that is primarily, I have discovered, about being frightened of my own emotions and being frightened of my own anger about things. And for me, allowing myself to say, wow, I'm feeling really pissed off about that, is a huge breakthrough. I don't actually need to be shouting or sort of throwing things around. I just need to admit to myself that I'm angry about something.
Yeah, anger doesn't have to mean harming the people around you in whatever way that looks. Yeah.
Exactly. You are allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to take it out on other people in an unpleasant way, but you are allowed to be angry. And I was kind of in a lot of ways like the good girl. And I was always, I feel in retrospect anyway, recollections may vary, as one of my brothers says, but I feel like I was often part of the solution in a way, and not the problem. There were really serious things going down with various brothers when I was really quite little. And I saw some things and experienced some things that I was too young to feel like I had to help with. And, you know, I adore my brothers. They're all amazing people, but they did have some bad stuff going down. And I witnessed that. And there wasn't really much space for me doing any of these things. And becoming disabled as a young teenager was horrible and very isolating. Very isolating. And we didn't talk about it. One of my brothers was brilliant medically about it. But, you know, he later said to me when I gave birth at home, "Oh, I always thought you were a hypochondriac. You're obviously not." And that was fairly devastating.
Yeah. There are a lot of signs around the house. Don't use this, don't put things here. I think my favourite was a tub that said pastry cutters only. It was so weirdly specific.
It's so niche, isn't it?
There were a lot of rules as well. Only girls could sit on a particular sofa.
Yeah, only clean women. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of messy stuff in terms of what that's telling you all. What is your memory of those rules and signs and how they affected you?
Well, some of them were kind of amusing in a way. You know, it wasn't too bad. I mean, it was partly because there were various people working in the house, and so the sharp knives one actually was put in there after somebody cut themselves. And my mum, you know, wanted to protect people from that, obviously. In fact, we could have had a system that meant the knives were in a safer place than lying down in a drawer, which is a classic no-no, right? But nothing could move, obviously. Things can't move from where they are, so that wouldn't have happened. I think that the notices I never saw as being a problem, but I think the rules that surrounded everything definitely were, and they were a symptom of that. I mean, the notices we like to sort of giggle about now. My grandmother was a real notice writer in a very odd way. But I think the rules, I mean, it was partly because if you did that, then the boiler didn't break. I mean, as we discovered after my mother's death, everything went wrong because we hadn't necessarily been following all those rules. But it was deeply liberating to not follow all those rules. It was possibly worth it. She had this rigidity to her. I've definitely wondered about neurodiversity. She just couldn't see that there was another way of doing things. She just couldn't do it. And that's something I've had to get over with. It's quite annoying for my husband, to put it mildly, to be married to somebody who has these convictions about this is how it is. And I really, really worked on trying to be less rigid, trying to be, you know, there is another way to make a white sauce, or, you know, you can put your socks away in a different way, or whatever it is. Yeah, the model was very much, you have to do it this way or the world will fall apart. And of course it's anxiety, it's control, because you feel anxious about the world and you're trying to, but it took me a long time to realize that's why she was doing it.
One of the signs actually shifted something for me.
Really?
There was a mug with something in it like, don't use
Yes.
this mug. And I thought I had such a mug problem in my house. And I thought that while I don't have signs, I live on my own, I don't need signs telling people what to do. But it did make me think, I do have mugs that I don't ever use because they're a bit too small, or they don't feel great in my hands, or, you know, we've all got our favourite mug, and I've got maybe 3 or 4 that I use on rotation. And it did make me think, okay, I might not have signs saying don't use this mug, but I do have mugs that I never use.
Yeah.
And why do I still have them in the house?
Yeah. Yeah. No, she couldn't let go of things, but she had this thing of things being too special to use, which is daft. And we're all trying not to do that. And we all have stuff that my brothers and I all have stuff now that we use with joy that had been sitting in a cupboard, either just overlooked or too special to use. And it's like, who are we keeping this for? Our children are not going to want it. the notice that says, "Do not use this mug," we have framed and put in our cupboard with our mugs because it's so funny. And we have the mug in which it was in, which my husband gave to my mum like 30 years ago. And it was a very nice mug, but it was designed for use.
Yes, it is really liberating to shake off that, oh, I can't burn this candle because it's too nice. I can't use that crockery in case I drop it.
Yeah.
It's really liberating to say, no, actually use the things.
Yeah, absolutely. In general, as a sort of word of life, right? Use the thing.
Use the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And take care of it, but
yes,
but use it. My husband is so good at he still has like his coloured pencils from when he was a child, and he doesn't have any others. He's kept them. He's kept taken care of them, so he hasn't needed to buy any other ones. Which, I mean, it's a sort of holy grail, isn't it? If one struggles with stuff, but he even has his little eraser, little rubber thing. Like, it's tiny, but he's very attached to it, and he's managed not to lose it. And I find that extraordinary. But it's been very good for me to be married to somebody who's like that.
Yeah. You and your siblings have different approaches to the stuff at times. There's a scene where your brother says you're throwing things away too quickly and wants to check everything, which I could relate to. Did those kind of differences create conflict at the time, or were you able to work with it? Because I would imagine that's a really common friction whenever siblings are doing this kind of task.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in the film you see me and Lawrence. He's the one with the saying that we should be going slower. Interestingly, he is the tidiest of all of us, and yet he was the one that wanted to keep things the most, in a way, whereas Edward, who perhaps has the most stuff, was very much in favour of sort of things being sold and leaving. So I think we all surprised each other. I think primarily I did most of the actual sort of work, the going through stuff, and that meant that I had free rein to a certain extent, and it made it easier, because if we'd all been trying to do it, it would have been totally impossible. And I was very conscious of what other people would want to have, and I didn't just sort of willy-nilly chuck everything in the bin. But the volume was so gigantic that most of it had to go. And I went through all the letters. I did, literally. I mean, cupboards and cupboards of letters and things. I did go through them, and I did make sure that things that would be meaningful to other people would be kept. But I think as adults, we all have a different attitude towards stuff. I think how much we want to have, how full our houses are, whether we have actual sort of problems with it or not. When my husband and I first got married, he looked behind the sofa once and he was like, "Harriet, what's that?" And there were lots of plastic bags full of things behind the sofa. And to me, that was a space. That was an unused space. It was very logical that I would stuff things behind the sofa. And he was like, "That's really weird. Why would you do that?" And I was like, why would I not do that? Like, why would you not use that space to, like, store stuff? And Lawrence definitely doesn't do that. I think the rest of us have a little bit of that. I think Edward and I most, probably. But yeah, I think we all also inherited my father's relationship with objects, which was have beautiful things that are genuinely good objects, if you see what I mean, for their art historical interest. He didn't have any connection whatsoever with keeping the plastic plate. Whereas for my mum, the plastic plate and the 15th century screen were pretty much of equal importance. In fact, the plate would have won. And a friend of mine said, "I think maybe your mum outsourced her emotions onto the objects." I thought, yeah, she certainly did it with memories.
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't know whether you can relate to that, but I got what she meant.
Yeah, I definitely do it with memories.
Mm,
And probably to some degree, to a lesser degree with emotions. I would say the odd thing that would apply to
mm,
rather than everything. But yeah, there are certainly, I can't let go of that because somebody gave it me who's now
yeah,
died. And therefore, this represents my
yeah,
grief. And if I give it away, then
yeah,
it's all meaningless. You know,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
absolutely. Yeah. I did have this real revelation when I was doing the house that just because this object is full of memory doesn't mean it's full of good memory, doesn't mean it makes me happy. And in the film, you see me saying that to Matt, and he had definitely not thought about it. And I'm not sure that any of them managed that one, actually, managed to be like, is this a memory or is this actually a happy memory? And that was a big deal for me.
Yeah, definitely. You've anticipated my next question because that really stood out to me as well. You say, I know I have things and I think, actually, this isn't a happy memory and I don't want to keep this.
Yeah,
And a lot of listeners keep things for many different reasons, and some
yeah,
are associated with bad memories.
yeah.
Do you have any wisdom about embracing that approach? Your approach?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a little bit like, I know that this, our world is a little bit uncomfortable with Marie Kondo, but I think her sparking joy thing almost gets it. She writes, I mean, she doesn't get books at all, I think, but she does say at some point something about, is there a book glowering at you from the shelf? And I find that useful because objects can glower at you, I think.
Yes.
And either in a sort of, you should be the sort of person who does this. I found I am no longer allowed by my occupational therapist to knit, for instance, and really to hand sew, because she's like, if you want to keep your hands capable of doing your major media that you use for art, you're not going to be able to do that. That's putting too much strain on them. And so in my studio, I have lots and lots of stuff for knitting, and they just glowered at me. And I read a book about clutter once, which said, is your future hypothetical self getting in the way of your current, or your past self getting in the way of your current self? And I was like, yeah, I'm coming in here and feeling unhappy because I'm thinking about all the nice things I want to knit or the nice things I used to knit. So instead of sitting here feeling unhappy and it getting in the way of my current life, I'm going to get rid of it and give it to somebody who really likes it. And that was a very pleasant, choosing somebody, talking to them about this I bought for the project, blah, 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 And that's a time-consuming way of getting rid of things that doesn't always work. But I think with the painful, complex memory objects, I mean, that's very personal, that's about me. But when it's related to other people, I think it is that thing of sitting with the objects and going, okay, what does that remind me of? How do I actually feel? I mean, the example is a very beautiful painting that was in our dining room, which I'd always, 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 always wanted to have. I had the place that was going to go in our house, and everybody wanted it, as predicted. And I didn't want to be I didn't want to want anything that everybody wanted, because I just didn't want to do that. But also, I sort of had this image of me sitting at the dining table for my entire life, looking at this picture, which I did, and realizing that quite often I was looking at the picture because I didn't want to be there. Or I felt that I wasn't there. I felt that I didn't really exist. And obviously I was much the youngest, and there were a lot of big emotions and things going down, as we've discussed. And quite a lot of the time I just sort of kept quite quiet. I'm not a naturally quiet person, but I wasn't necessarily as present as other people. And I realized that painting in a way symbolized that. That was where I was. It's a beautiful, beautiful painting of countryside. I was in that pink and green and blue countryside rather than being at the dining table. And the person at the dining table wasn't necessarily very happy. And so I didn't want that painting, actually. And where we would have put it, I have a watercolour that I did when we were first married, which makes me very happy. And that was the painting that gave me that revelation. And then after that, that made it easier, because that was like the highest stakes object in the house for me. And I don't have it, and I'm quite happy I don't have it. And that was a real revelation for me about other things, looking at a toy and thinking, well, actually, whatever.
Yeah, it's like something can be a significant memory without being a good memory.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth about that, but I have also had objects of different kinds that I have kind of dissociated into.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not in this room. These things aren't happening. I'm somehow over there in those clothes I can see in the wardrobe or whatever it is. And
yeah,
while that felt like safety and it's safety of a really bitter,
yeah,
unpleasant kind. And
yeah,
just because something felt like it saved me at the time doesn't mean it's something I need in my life now.
yeah. And maybe, as we were talking about earlier, maybe in one sense, you've put that memory into that object, and that's exactly why that object should be leaving, because that's come out of you and into that, and right, off you go. And I do genuinely believe that objects can have a kind of, it's not an aura, but they can, I think other people's pain can be in an object as well.
Yeah.
I found when my mother was still alive, we were going through it took us an entire day, and we went through a chest of drawers. We did, actually. I was trying to get her to get rid of things, and she actually did. But she had this nightie, this beautiful, beautiful silk nightie that was unworn. And I said to her, where's that come from? What's that? And it was after her father left, her mother basically hoped that she could get back together with him. And she bought this beautiful nightie to sort of help that process. And it was the saddest, this unused, beautiful silk nightie wrapped in tissue paper. Oh my God, that object was it had to go. And I was like, I can't believe you kept this in your drawer, emanating sort of waves of misery. Oh, it was such a painful object to look at,
Yeah. I hope you're finding this episode useful. If you want the amazing feeling that comes with supporting something you truly appreciate, you can donate to support the podcast. If that's not possible at the moment, leaving a review and sharing the show with others who would benefit from it are also incredibly helpful. Every contribution, big or small, helps a lot. Find out more at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. What is your relationship with stuff like now, and has it changed since the experience of clearing out your parents' house?
Yeah, I think we immediately thought, right, we've got to plan our pensions. We've got to make sure our will is properly in order. We've got to make lists of objects that we want people to have. We make sure that we try and make it easier for our children. But on a deeper level, I think I do think more about, why do I own this? Do I need to own this? Can I get rid of this? My husband has always been very good at this. He always said, we're not putting anything in the attic of the house. And I never got that. I was like, why would we not just, why would we not put, it totally baffled me. And of course, as soon as I started cleaning out the house, I was like, you're entirely right. I have a few areas that I struggle with. One of them, weirdly, is cardboard boxes. Really nice boxes and tins I have a bit of a problem with. And every now and then I will say to my husband, can you go through my boxes for me? And he will go and get rid of some. But I don't know why I struggle with them. I mean, I send a lot of parcels. I can justify it. But objectively, I have more boxes than I need. And there are definitely, I feel shame about sort of mess, clutter, stuff, whichever word we use. And my husband said the other day, it's not mess, it's stuff. I'm like, okay, well, maybe, yeah. But I hate that I have all this stuff that I don't really know where to put it, and I don't really have a place for it. But it isn't overwhelming. So I think it's, yeah, it's sort of under control, I suppose I would say. But I am aware that I can see how it's something that could overwhelm me, if you know what I mean. It's definitely a symptom that could pop up if I went through something traumatic. I can definitely see that.
I learned early on in trying to start sorting all of this out that I find tearing up cardboard boxes quite cathartic.
Oh.
So that has solved a big part of my cardboard box problem. Is I look at a cardboard box and I think, oh, I'll really enjoy tearing that up, rather than, oh, that could be really useful.
Ah, yeah. I don't pick stuff off the street anymore. I used to do that a lot.
That's good.
Rescuing stuff, that is a family trait. Yes. Things must be rescued from skips. We used to have loads and loads of baths and sinks and things lying around. One of my brothers particularly was a real rescuer. Yeah, I used to really, I just couldn't leave it. It's like, but it's going to get chucked in the, you know, and it would go in the actual sort of bin. And yeah, I don't have that so much anymore.
That's good. What is one habit or practice that has either improved or helped you to maintain your own mental health?
It has to be meditating, definitely, and mindfulness in general. And mindfulness very much in the sense of trying to be present. I have a wonderful, wonderful friend who has done, who does mindful self-compassion courses based on Kristin Neff's work. And they are absolutely life-changingly brilliant. Mindful self-compassion, I think, is what's wonderful about it is that you don't need anybody else. You can do it if you're struggling on your own because you're giving yourself what you're not getting elsewhere. And I think it's incredible. And that has helped me so much to deal with my own feelings and anxiety and everything. Yeah, I think that's absolutely incredible. And if you Google Kristin Neff, mindful self-compassion, there are lots of places where there are courses and stuff like that, and you can do them online and read her book. And anyway, I sound like I'm being paid to say this, but I'm not. I think it's absolutely bonkersly brilliant. And also ACT therapy. I mean, I have a fantastic therapist who does specifically therapy for people with disabilities and chronic illness and terminal illness, and she's disabled herself, and is just the most amazing woman on the planet. So, you know, it's very much other people, other wise people, I think I would say is the main thing.
Yeah, I know the name Kristin Neff, but I don't think I've read it. I find mindfulness incredibly useful as well. I can't deal with meditating. I can't deal with that degree of silence, kind of mental silence. But my closest thing to meditating that I do find incredibly helpful is putting the shipping forecast on. There's just
it's sort of verbal white noise.
Yeah, it's evocative, but also kind of meaningless to me as somebody not on a ship.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just the perfect level, and it's got a rhythm. And I subscribe to the Shipping Forecast podcast.
I love it. That's brilliant.
Yeah, so I've always got one in my podcast
Yeah.
feed, like if things are getting a bit much, it's I think I need a shipping forecast.
Low Shannon 977, expected Tyne 967 by 1800 on Saturday. New lows expected Seoul 982 and Malin 972 by the same time. The area forecasts for the next 24 hours. Viking, southeast 5 to 7, backing east 6 to gale 8. Showers, good. Northward Sierra, southeasterly backing easterly 5 or 6, fair, good.
I mean, to be fair, on the mental, no, the mental noise, I can't do non-guided meditations.
Yeah.
Because I can't stay in that place long enough. The squirrel inside my head is bouncing around. But guided meditations, I think, are wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, definitely employing more mindfulness in my life has been incredibly helpful. Where am I now? What's happening now?
Yeah.
Rather than what if or what was. Kind of, okay, let's just bring it all back to now.
Yeah. And also, I think for me as well, the kind of practicing non-attachment and having this sense, particularly with my kind of the controlling level of our childhood, having this sense of like, just let it go. Why am I defending my position, particularly in a relationship, and like grasping this being right, being it doesn't matter. Like and obviously you don't just go, oh well, I'm just gonna decide it doesn't matter anymore. But in the moment thinking, is this the hill I want to die on? Is this worth it? What am I doing? That self-reflection of let go. Let go of this one. You know, you can be married or you can be right. And they say that, don't they?
I read an online, I think it was on Reddit discussion the other day where somebody's partner wanted them to apologize for something, but they believed they were right. And the comments were really split between people saying, just apologize anyway. It's fine. You're not losing anything by saying, I'm sorry. And the other half of people going, but you were right. Absolutely don't apologize. And I think it's about picking your battles and sometimes apologizing even when you fully believe you weren't in the wrong, and then sticking up for yourself the times it matters.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of apologizing. That I kind of over apologize horrendously. And I've only realized sort of fairly recently that actually that's quite manipulative, and I don't mean it like that. But as if somehow if you can apologize, then you can make it all go away. And what you're trying to do is to make somebody else's emotion go away. You're trying to squash their feelings. You're trying to, you know, my daughter has taught me this actually, that, you know, we are all allowed to have feelings. We don't actually have to sort of constantly brush over the surface and pretend they're not there. And that's always been my mechanism. And I think anybody who's grown up in a family of sort of unpredictable anger, that's your sort of good girl mechanism, isn't it? You want to make it all okay. You want everyone to be okay, and you want everything to be nice. And actually, if you're in a functional family, having somebody who's trying to make it nice all the time, it's not really very helpful. And my daughter has the courage to say, I don't want to do that. And I think that's great.
That's really interesting.
Even if it makes us clash, it's a healthy mechanism.
Yes, clashing is okay.
Yeah.
As long as it's, you know, not destructive and...
No, exactly. And I think my model for people arguing has never been great. So I'm very, very frightened of arguing. I'm very frightened of people getting cross with me. And that's, you know, means that I don't allow myself to be cross. And you know, as we were saying, you are allowed to be annoyed with people sometimes.
Yeah.
This is the world.
Yeah, completely. I was explaining that to a child the other day and thinking, because he couldn't understand how there'd been something on TV and someone was annoyed with someone and then said, I love you. And he was like, how can you love them if you're annoyed with them? And I was trying to like explain that that could happen while also explaining it to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that thing of two things are true, isn't it?
Completely.
Which I think is really, really useful as a child to learn that it's, those that can actually be the case.
Yeah.
And we have it all the time, don't we? With, I want to keep this object and I know it's going to get in the way. How do we navigate that one? Yeah.
Yeah. Something that's really helping me at the moment is to think I can want it and still let it go. Those two things can happen. I can want it and still live fine without it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I always said to my brothers, and I used to say this to my mum too, if she was struggling to tidy up, I also had this thing, there will be something after the cleanup that you regret having got rid of. But you still did the right thing in doing the cleanup. It was still worth it. And it's not going to be perfect. And I remember saying that to my brothers before we started on the house. It's not going to be perfect. This is going to be messy. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to get rid of things by mistake that we didn't want to. We're going to lose stuff, but we're still going to do it. And that's the thing, isn't it? You will. And I still have that. If I'm doing a big tidy up of my studio, I will lose something. I will throw something away that I regret. I get rid of my clothes. I will regret that jumper, but I'm still going to be happier with the sum total of the tidy up.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have an extra question. This is the bit where I ask guests an extra question. It's sometimes a slightly silly one. And Dehoarding Darlings get access to this extra question and the answer. If you would like to become a Dehoarding Darling, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. Is there anything we haven't covered about your experience of your mum's relationship with her stuff, or about the experience of clearing out their house that we haven't talked about that you think is important?
I think one of the things that just a little bit is interesting, the way that when you go through somebody's stuff that they really haven't curated at all, what you find out about them and how that affects you.
Yeah.
As a child, or, anybody who clears out somebody else's stuff. And I feel like you can be kind in what you leave behind, not just in volume. But I think there are things that I found of my parents that I don't think that they should have left for us to find.
Yeah.
And, I think that there's, why do you keep damaging things? Especially if you've had, if you're knocked over by a car and that's that. But if you've had a period of illness, go through your stuff and get rid of the things that are going to hurt people. I don't think you need to keep them. Think about that. In a way, think about your audience a little bit. And I do appreciate that that's easy to say.
No, I think it's a really important point.
And in that book about death, the Swedish death cleaning book, she writes about having a shoebox, which obviously is quite a small container, but the idea of having a box of stuff that is just for you, that you suggest, I can't now remember what she says, that your children shouldn't look through it, but that you say, I'm keeping this for me, and you are, throw it away without looking if you want to, kind of thing. And I think that there's a lot of kindness in that.
Yeah.
Even without the volume, which is unkind, obviously, to leave your children with that level, or anybody else, in a way. And obviously, I know that you're, if you're collecting massive amounts of stuff, you're not doing it for funsies. You're not getting rid of it for funsies. But if you can at least get rid of or put into a shoebox labeled throw away or whatever, stuff that might hurt somebody, I think, whether it's your diary entries about them or, I have a whole pile of my mother's diaries, which she said, I don't want anyone other than you to see these. And I started having a look at reading them and I was like, oh, no. just because of stuff they said about me, just a tiny few sentences of, rang Harriet today, but she was really distant, or, had dinner with the children and someone seemed to be in a mood and I don't know why. And I just thought, no.
Yeah.
And my son has said, I'll read them for you, because I don't think a generation later they'll hurt. I'll read them for you and see whether you should. And I'm like, no. Talking of things glowering, they're in my studio and they're sort of sitting there, and
yeah,
I kind of think maybe I should just burn them. But there's part of me that's like, yeah, but what if? Yeah, that's an object, or objects with uncomfortable meaning.
Do you feel like maybe in there, if you kept reading, there'd be redemption? There would be your mother's joy at seeing you. There's a chance of things improving in that respect if you read on.
No, I don't think so.
No.
I think I got my redemption miraculously when my mother died, and because of what happened to her, and she was unwell. She wasn't quite herself, but she was a nicer version of herself in some ways. She was slightly crazy, but she was a nicer version of herself when she was dying. And she did say nice things, and we did have a very kind of nice time, an unexpected sort of arc of redemption, which, rarely happens actually. And I feel like that's enough. That's done. I don't want to look through difficult stuff to find kernels of good stuff.
Yeah.
I think I probably would have done if I hadn't had the kind of caring for dying person arc of redemption thing. But as it is, I think it's better to just let them go.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you were saying about kind of, you acknowledge that, people with a lot of stuff aren't doing it for fun.
Absolutely.
Equally, we have to take responsibility and accountability for our lives and what we do leave behind.
Yeah.
Even given that this is difficult and an unusual relationship with stuff and all of those things that make it understandable, but equally we can't opt out of taking responsibility.
No, and I don't know whether seeing it as an act of kindness to somebody else to try and manage at least the hard stuff, the painful stuff. I don't know whether that helps, but I think it is certainly, it is a way of showing kindness, and obviously a very, very difficult one. And I really don't want to underestimate how hard it is to have hoarding disorder. But yeah, it could be an act of real, genuine kindness to do that.
I think you're right. So Harriet, first of all, thank you so much. If people want to find you online, on social media, anything like that, where can they do so?
Well, I'm on Instagram at tulip and butterfly, and my website is www.thetulipandthebutterfly.com, and I have a lot of my art online and for sale. And as you say, very much inspired by nature and this crazy, crazy, beautiful place I grew up in.
Harriet, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's the bit where that hoarder shouts out someone wise.
Shout out this week to a podcast called This Organised Life. If you are tempted by new clothes in the January sales, have a listen to this.
There's a tremendous amount of resources that go into creating new clothing, from carbon emissions to I think it's one t-shirt takes 2,700 gallons of water to create. So we want to restore and protect those resources, and the best way we can do it is by reusing clothes that already exist. So the most sustainable clothes are clothes that already exist, which is staggering.
Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.